Good evening, everybody. Hello. Evening. Thanks for braving our somewhat cold Kansas weather and being here. I think we'll have a lot more people joining us online. I've been asked to make a few announcements. Number one, tomorrow at, that's the audio on the computer up here. Hold on. You probably don't want a Google ad while I'm talking. All right. So David Roediger, famous historian at KU, is going to give the Tuttle Lecture, which might be named for someone in this room. Tomorrow at the Kansas Union at 4 o'clock. The subject is his autobiography, which is being published this week. And also, the Watkins Museum is going to have a talk with author Michael Travis about his new book, Kansas Baseball, on Wednesday, March 26th at 7 p.m. So a little background for this particular program we're doing today. This is the 50th anniversary of the Watkins Museum of History, and that got us to thinking about what other possibly slightly more iconic institutions in town are having anniversaries. And this is KU's 160th anniversary of its founding, although classes didn't start until later on. So we invited Curtis Marsh to come back. He's a renowned speaker, an expert on KU history and lore, to talk about the subject of his book. And I got permission to tell this story, so just bear that in mind. So we had someone here today introducing a speaker for an earlier program, and they were kind enough to do some announcements of upcoming events. And they said that tonight at the Watkins Museum, we're going to have they're going to have Curtis Marsh talking about the subject of his book, KU-Phoria. And I said, oh, hold up. If you're a Mizzou fan, it's KU-Phoria. Otherwise, you know, if you're here in Lawrence, it's KU-Phoria. So with that, I would like to have us all give a warm welcome to our friend, Curtis Marsh.
Will got permission to tell that story, but not from me. And sure enough, it was a little unforeseen, but on occasion I get people asking about KU-Phoria, and I think Will presented it accurately. If you are not a fan of the University of Kansas, perhaps that's what you have. But no, we've got KU-Phoria, clearly. It is absolutely lovely to see so many familiar faces in the audience, but it means I'm not going to be able to make up as many stories as I usually do. It is also really fun to be celebrating, as Will mentioned, not just an anniversary for the University of Kansas, but an anniversary for the Watkins Museum as well. 10 years ago, the university celebrated its 150th, and the decision was perhaps informally made that we would do it for 2 years. First of all, it's fun to celebrate 150th anniversary, so why not do it for a bit longer than you otherwise would? But also, as Will mentioned, because KU became a university in 1865, but welcomed students in 1866. So you get to decide when the university became a thing. Can you be a school before you have students? I don't know, but in any case, 65, 66, both initial years for the university, and so let's just celebrate as long as we can. One of the ways that I enjoy celebrating is telling the stories of the school, both academic and athletic, and traditions, and I think that because we're celebrating specifically the anniversary of the school, perhaps some of the stories, at least at the beginning, should be about its inception. So we've already covered the element of when did KU first begin. Now, even in this room, you can see some images and evidence of Quantrill's raid, which was in 1863. But I think it's interesting to consider the fact that 2 years later, the decision was made that we're going to have a university in Lawrence. If we think about that for a second, clearly this town was still recovering from this extraordinary event and rebuilding, and yet they said, hey, while we are dealing with this extraordinary event, let's start a school. Why not? Well, I think many of you know that the very first building was called Old North College. If you're familiar with campus, it was located very close to where the two dorms, GSP and Corbin, reside today. And we didn't have that building very long, but we are frequently asked today, what are the oldest buildings on campus? I'd love to ask you guys your thoughts on that, and do you have any ideas of what might be the oldest building on campus?
Spooner.
Yes.
Spooner.
Spooner. Any good guess? Any other guesses?
Dyke.
Say again.
Maybe Dyke.
Dyke is a good guess.
Fraser.
Fraser. These are all wonderful. I wish they were all correct. So Spooner, Fraser and Dyke, extraordinarily important buildings on campus. Old Fraser is clearly what you were referencing, and it was actually the oldest building after Old North College. But unfortunately for us, both Old North College and Old Fraser are a thing of the past. So it's kind of intriguing to figure out what building standing today is the oldest building on campus. It should be an easy question to answer, and yet what we've found is perhaps 3 buildings that could claim to be the oldest. Again, you get to decide. Spooner is one of our first 4 buildings. I actually have for the folks that are joining us online, I'm not sure how great you're going to see these photos, but the vast majority of them are available online, and you can check them out at other times. This beautiful palace is Old Snow Hall, one of our first 4 buildings. When I say our first 4 buildings, I'm talking about those that were built after Old North College was down. Old Fraser, also absolutely gorgeous. All of our first 4 buildings, in my opinion, were absolute works of art. We had Old Snow Hall, we had Old Fraser, we had Spooner, which is still with us, and then Old Blake. New Blake doesn't win any prizes for the most beautiful building on campus, but it is right next to Fraser, and is in the spirit of one of the first 4 buildings. So why is there any question as to whether Spooner is the oldest building on campus? It is the only one of the 4 that still remains. I thought you'd never ask. Predating Spooner, there was a power plant that took care of some of the elements of campus, and that power plant, the shell, still exists on campus, and some of you know what resides within that shell. The Hall Center, right next to the Dole Building. So ironically, you've got the Hall Center for the Humanities within what's left of a building that actually predates Spooner. Okay, maybe we can claim that that's the oldest building. However, there's actually an older one on campus. Some of you are familiar with Audio Reader. Nestled back in the woods to the north of the football stadium. There is also a house that is close to Audio Reader that was actually the home of our first director of the medical center before it went out to Kansas City. What is within that house now is actually the Max Kade German Studies Center, and they have taken what they now call the annex. This is going to be important here in a moment, I promise. I promise. It's so random at this point, but the annex for this German Studies Center, those of you who've been around long enough to remember KJHK had its own building. They called it the barn. And that is what is now the annex for this center. And amazingly enough, it is the barn of James Lane, who many people feel is the second most famous abolitionist behind John Brown. James Lane has an amazing story If you wish, I would be happy to send you a link to a YouTube video about him, because maybe this is a segue to our next topic. He is credited as having been the first person to use the term Jayhawk or Jayhawker. And from his public presentations sprung the notion that all of the folks in this part of the country that were fighting the bad guys in that other state were Jayhawkers. So that was James Lane's barn. And of course, we're talking about well before there was a University of Kansas, and KU just kind of grew around it. It is a building. It is on campus. Shouldn't it be the oldest building on campus? The only reason it doesn't officially get that label is that campus kind of grew around it, and it was there before. So it is not a campus building originally. I don't know. See, that's why it's so hard to be a historian. It really is. So if anyone asks you what's the oldest building on campus, you actually have three choices. Spooner Hall is our most famous, and it's a beautiful building, and one of the one only building remaining of our first original four. Hall Center for the Humanities is in the shell of a building even older, and then tucked away just to the north of the stadium is a building even older. Okay, if you don't get anything else out of tonight, you now know more than perhaps you wanted to know about KU's oldest building. I want to make sure that you know that Will is helping us out with any questions that come from our online viewers, of which there are thousands.
Yes, already.
Okay.
It's amazing.
And I am not just comfortable with questions during the presentation, I actually ask that you specifically interrupt me and give me questions during the presentation. A group of this size can help me direct what kind of topics that we choose. And frankly, I've been talking about KU for long enough that I'm comfortable with almost every kind of question.
I do have a question.
Oh,
You say the annex on that house by the audio reader. There's also a smaller building kind of east of it, right? When you say the annex, is it physically attached to the house?
It is not. You may be actually thinking about the building that we're talking about. If I've got it right, we've got the audio reader building, pretty sizable. We've got just to the south of it and a little bit to the west, an actual home that where the German Center resides. And then, yeah, it is right. It's just east of it that
Real small building.
it's a barn.
Now we know.
You got it. That's right. The oldest building on campus. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Kansas right now. I'm a part of KJ today. So were the members upset when they were told, hey, we're leaving their building? And did they go straight to another place, or were they like not have like a home for a little bit?
Actually, some folks in this room can help keep me honest on this, but I believe that KJ left that barn and went to the student union.
Okay.
I'm getting some yeses from the experts. So I don't know that they were upset with it. I mean, certainly, you know, you like feeling as though you've got a place to call your own, and that it helps build identity for the program. I'm also not 100% sure they knew the history of that building, because oldest building on campus, even though it predated campus. But it is an important story for campus, because anyone who wants to dig a little deeper into the origins of the Jayhawk have to learn a little bit about James Lane. And of course, you know what, I really enjoy talking with students about perspective when it comes to understanding these discussions. Let me do, I don't want this to, yeah, there he is. That is the KU Bulldog.
Sure.
The KU Bulldog. So I have just put the cart well before the horse. The Jayhawk is unique, and it helps us to feel a stronger sense of love for the university when we can say that our mascot is truly unique. Super irony, if you were to check the school district website for the district in Jeanette, Pennsylvania, they are the Jayhawks. I should have pulled it up, but it's going to take too long. You're just going to have to use your imagination. In the late 40s, one of our assistant football coaches chose to leave KU and go back to his home in Jeanette, Pennsylvania, kind of a suburb of Pittsburgh. Relatively small town. Their team did not have a mascot, and because this was the late 40s, this Jayhawk was only a couple years old, and he said, we just got this cool mascot way out in Kansas, let's use that one. And so since the late 40s, the Jeanette, Pennsylvania high school has been the Jayhawks. And I am tempted to pull up the website because it's surreal to look at this page and see this bird without the K and the U on his chest, and they've been using it forever. If you remind me, we'll get back to how Pennsylvania and KU have a unique connection. Yes.
Is there a college in Pennsylvania that shares the Trajan font for KU?
Oh, yes, really? In 2006, we decided, I even brought props as if I knew you were going to ask the question. This is the 1946 Jayhawk from 46 to 2006, and this is the extraordinary change that they made. Wow. Almost unrecognizable. However, and we don't have to get into it too much, but some of the folks in this room were intimately involved in the project in 06 that updated our images, our brand identity. And there was a consulting firm that came in and did all kinds of studies and surveys, and some people thought maybe too much, but I disagree. And of course, this is such a recognizable image that many people associated with the school said, that is our brand. And yet, it is a university, and we are asking students, faculty, and staff to represent us at conventions, conferences, and academic meetings. And it would be nice to have something that is perhaps less athletic, or even perhaps less of a cartoon. And so the decision, I'm gonna cut myself off and say, Will.
This question may be anticipating what you're about to talk about, but when was the bulldog the mascot?
Okay, it is, and we'll get right to it.
Okay.
Maybe a little quicker now. So to answer your question, the decision was made that the official image would be the K and the U with this unique swoop of the K under the U. And some questioned, was that worth all that we went through? And of course, there are so many elements to this brand identity. In fact, there is a company that has just a swoosh that's doing pretty well with just their swoosh.
Didn't cost a lot.
So are you asking how much it cost? It was somewhere around $80,000 that it was this fee for recreating our brand. And to your question, soon thereafter, we discovered that same image was being used by Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. They go by KU, the K has a little swoosh under the U, and some ambitious reporter gave him a call and said, how much did you pay? And I think it was around $5,000. So the initial message was, why did KU spend so much money on this Trajan font? And this other small school just spent $5,000. You know what the answer was that I'm rather proud of the university for giving? Part of our fee was that the consulting firm did a copyright and trademark search to determine whether we were able to protect this image. And because that search came empty, we protected it and could actually ask Kutztown to cease and desist, which of course we did not. But to answer the question of why did we go through all of that, it's because we don't always know how to dot the I's and cross the T's, and they did. And so Kutztown, which still uses that mark 20 years later, is using it because we love them, and we're not going to ask them to cease and desist. But this 2006 Jayhawk, which of course is pretty much the 1946 Jayhawk, And the evolution thereof is one of the only, in my opinion, one of the only schools that can really celebrate the evolution of the image. I mean, all the schools are updating them, but ours are the best. But when was the first Jayhawk? When, you know that long yellow-legged Jayhawk, what year is associated with that Jayhawk?
1912.
1912. Didn't we just say that we're celebrating the 160th anniversary? Weren't there students in 1866? There was a football team in 1890. There's a basketball team in 1899, and yet we didn't have a Jayhawk until 1912. How can you have a school without a mascot? It goes back to perspective. When schools of our age were creating mascots, it was primarily something that you brought to the game to give you luck and hopefully help you win. And if you won, you better bring whatever that was back so that you continue winning. And as it turns out, one of the easiest things to do was to bring your pet. While we can claim that the University of Kansas is the only university with Jayhawk as a mascot, there are over 60 universities for whom Bulldog is the mascot. There are almost as many for whom Wildcat and Tiger are the mascot. And so KU, while it claims the most unique mascot in the country, our two rivals have two of the most boring mascots in the country. That's too bad for them. But to the question online, I think we should consider ourselves lucky that we did choose the Jayhawk, because for a short period of time, in between the years that we were initiating our athletic teams, so very late 1800s, until 1912 when we officially got the Jayhawk, this fellow served as our mascot. There was a pig that served as our mascot. He's not in the book, maybe the second printing. Third printing, excuse me. But in any case, and there's also a very short story about how someone brought their kid brother to games, and because they won, the kid brother became the mascot. So we've got a pet, we've got a farm animal, and we've got a kid brother, all who served as mascots before, thank goodness, we chose that beautiful bird as our mascot. I didn't give a year, it's because I don't know, but a range.
Right.
So in any case, we've got this notion of the mascot having been evolved to the 1912 Jayhawk. We had our first 4 buildings that were beautiful palaces, and then of course we build into the 1900s and the mid 1900s, and the stories abound. I'm going to talk about a fellow that arrived in the 1930s, who was his story is primarily athletic. This book that I wrote it has a lot of basketball in it, but it also has a great deal of our traditions and our history. And one of my favorite topics is, how did these traditions come to be? How are they evolving? Should we be okay with them evolving? And frankly, I submit that really the only group that is powerful enough to create, edit, or delete our traditions are the students. If you can think of an example of a tradition that was either being changed or needed to be created, I would love to hear it, because I believe that our students are the only ones that can effectively do that. Yes?
When did they stop singing the Wheaties song when Player found them?
Let's see. If any of you know Jim Barnes, extraordinary band director of decade. In fact, I think he was an undergrad here in the early 60s and became our band director and retired not long ago. Very strong and renowned composer. He tells the story of the Wheaties song, and it's just basically that song where if someone fouls out, they play the song, and I think the message is you fouled out because you didn't eat your Wheaties. I don't remember that being an advertisement on television. But I know that it was. And I think that the message was all of these things that didn't happen for you, they would have gone so much better if you ate your Wheaties. I think they still play that song. I feel pretty confident that they still play the song. I don't know how long it's been since we've sung the song, because I feel like very few people in the crowd know the words. I also feel like very few people in the crowd know the "I'm a Jayhawk" words. And Jim Barnes says, gosh, can't we get people to sing the words of that song instead of doing that dang clap that nobody can figure out anyway?
I'm thinking that there are words to that song that said you should have had your Wheaties.
Yeah.
You know, that was part of the advertisement. And so that, I think what you're talking about is like, you didn't have your Wheaties, which is why you screwed up.
You found out.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's these things in the TV advertisement would have gone better for you. It's the early version of needing a Snickers bar, because I'm things aren't going great. I just need a break. And you should have had you didn't have your Wheaties. You didn't eat your Wheaties.
Well, there's actually a promotion where you got a t-shirt in a Wheaties box from KU. I have that at home.
I have seen those, and it doesn't have a Jayhawk on the Wheaties box.
Yes.
The reason, and this is a theme throughout my presentations and my book, the reason that KU is better than every other school, it isn't because we're perfect, but it's because that the traditions are strong, the history is strong, the alumni base is extraordinarily strong. We do these things so well that we can compete against anyone in those arenas. That might be a solid bias. It might be a solid bias. I would like to talk about a tradition. This goes back to this notion that the students are the ones that can affect our traditions. And actually, it's another example or illustration of how solid our alumni base is, that we are frequently getting concerns or comments about how these traditions on campus should be continued or shouldn't evolve, or why are we doing this? And the clapping to the fight song, we've done at least a half dozen videos teaching people how to do that clap, and it is not working. It is not working. I actually have an idea for another video that might work, the seventh one or the sixth one. In any case, I would love to share with you one class of students that I feel are the only ones to create a tradition while they were on campus and kill a tradition while they were on campus. And that's a pretty solid badge of honor. And it's important enough that I put it on the cover of my book. So give me just a moment. Yeah. Let's make it a little bigger. That's my microphone doing that. Sorry, gang. Okay, there's the book. I made it, I blew it up a little bit too much. So many interesting stories about the university are connected to our military. I grew up in a military family. My family actually didn't come to Kansas until I started high school. And I had planned on going back to the East Coast, where the majority of my extended family was, for college, till I came here for music camp and met all these cool people and became comfortable with the school and decided to stay. But if we look at the mid-40s, remember the 46 is when we got the Jayhawk that we use today. And from 41 to 46, we had that very popular angry Jayhawk. I'm just checking to see if anyone's wearing the angry hawk. So literally during the years of World War II for the US, we had a different Jayhawk. And yet, as you would expect, enrollment was going down and down each year that the war continued. Whether it was because college-age students were fighting in the war, or it was because families needed their children to stay home to help them with whatever elements they were facing during the war.
Curtis, I think I'm wearing the war hawk.
You are, there we go. Thank goodness. So we do have, Warhawk is represented.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. In 1945, the enrollment at the university was 2,700 students. It was right around a tenth of what it is now, depending on how you count. And you know, it had decreased each year during the 40s. And then in 46, when the war ended and students felt, for whatever reason, comfortable to come back to school, the enrollment in 1946 was 9,000. 9,000 small compared to what it is today, but it was more than 3 times the enrollment of the year before. And if you can imagine, that would mean 100,000 students coming next year to KU. There weren't enough professors, there weren't enough dorms, apartments, there weren't enough classrooms, there weren't enough seats. And it was, I can only imagine, I think a good illustration is that up until Hemingway was our chancellor, up until the mid-90s, there were remnants of temporary dorms under the bleachers of Memorial Stadium. That students that were coming to school in the mid to late 40s had to live under the bleachers. Maybe there are some living there now. In any case, the students that returned in 1946 were asked to do what students for 20 years before them were asked to do. I'm going to have you go over to that table and we're going to issue you your freshman beanie. And you're going to wear your freshman beanie any moment that you are on campus. And if you're caught without it, there will be repercussions. The kind that aren't allowed anymore. And so this was a tradition. The freshman beanie was a tradition. If you made it through your freshman year, you could throw it away and you were free to go beanieless on campus. First person accounts of that moment in 1946, one of them coming from Warren Corman, who was the class of 1950, so he started in 46, was that these World War II veterans, many of whom in their 20s, many of whom had seen some things, were issued to this table. And probably on the other side of the table was maybe a junior, a 19, maybe a 20-year-old saying, you have to wear that beanie. What they heard was, why don't you come around from that table and try and put that beanie on my head? We'll see how it goes for you. And literally, the freshman beanie tradition was killed by this class, this class of students that, number one, were coming to school in 46, and number two, were not to be trifled with. In fact, quick tangent, sorry, this is quite a tangent, but I'll say it quickly. Fog Allen played for James Naismith as a student, took over as coach for a year, and then left to go get a degree in osteopathic medicine. When he returned to KU, he returned not as our basketball coach, but as kind of the athletic director, because they already had an athletic coach. And this was right after World War I had ended. And as the relatively recent biography on Fogg states, the coach was intimidated by these students that were coming back from World War I and took off. And so Fogg had to be the coach. And it was probably going to happen some other way, but that is how Fog Allen started coaching, was because the current coach was intimidated by the same kind of student that said, why don't you try and put that beanie on my head? Why don't you give it a shot? So I did promise you that this is a class of students who also created a tradition. And the decision was made to honor those who we lost in World War II with a bell tower. And it was amazingly quickly funded and built. Remember, 46 is when all these students are returning. And in 1950, it wasn't quite completed yet, but it was darn close. Scaffolding still towering to the top of the campanile. But May comes around, 1950, and it's time for the students to gather on top of the hill and walk down to commencement. Scaffolding still enshrouds this bell tower, and yet the students knew that this was a memorial to the people, and some of them were known to the graduating seniors. They said, you know, this is kind of our memorial, and they pushed the scaffolding aside and chose to do what before they walked down the hill? Walked through it, creating this tradition that is stronger today than it ever has been. Clear illustration of the students creating a tradition that is important today, simply because they knew that this was a memorial to those who had fallen in World War II. And this is actually a picture of the scaffolded bell tower, and they're walking down for commencement. I don't know why the sprinklers were going. I don't know why. There are two pretty solid theories, one of which is, thank goodness this is no longer the case, but commencement used to be at 2:30 in the afternoon. And even mid-May or late May, it was dang hot. So maybe this was outside air conditioning. The other theory that I actually buy is that there was a strong interest in keeping students off of the field. And that's a pretty solid way of doing it. So, not important. But this is the class of 1950 creating, literally a picture of them creating the tradition of walking through the campanile on your way down the hill to commencement. And it is the same class that said freshman beanies are no longer a thing. So again, you know, we are already super proud of the traditions and the history of this school, but when you dig a little deeper and find out how they got started, it's just, right, it's super cool. I think I've actually got a better picture of it that I'd love to show you. And while I'm doing that, I am gonna stop.
That's when you make a sudden movement that
Okay,
sometimes
no
that happens.
sudden movements.
Yeah.
How are we doing online?
Oh, we're fine, yeah.
Good. If I would just stop hitting the zoom button instead of the page. So that's not going to show you in any great detail, any better detail what I meant, but there's commencement. And I think it's important that we mention, you know, it wasn't but 2 years ago that we celebrated the 100th year of the football stadium. It is important to note that commencement has been held at the football stadium since it was opened in 1922 or 23. I cannot remember which of those it is. But for 100 years, celebrating commencement, we actually had a consultant, proof that there is a consultant for everything. Well, we had a consultant come in 2007 to talk about our commencement program. So a commencement consultant. And as it turns out, this fellow's story was that he was a theater professor in Texas, University of, and Texas said, you know, we've got so many students, a lot of them are just skipping commencement because you don't really get to shake the chancellor's hand and get your diploma. How do we encourage more participation in our commencement? And the comment that I will never forget from him is, you don't even know how lucky you are to have this tradition that not a single student wants to miss. Now, several people in this room will back me up on the notion that even today, but more so when we were scheduling commencement at 2:30 in the afternoon, we'd have students walk down the hill and then maybe walk elsewhere instead of going. We used to say that walking down the hill and leaving before the ceremony is a little bit like walking down the aisle and leaving before you say, I do. But this consultant from Texas said, extraordinarily lucky to have such an important tradition connected to your commencement, and that's a joy.
Related to this, when I was at KU, the lore was you could not walk through the campanile until your graduation day, or you would not make it to graduation. Did that happen?
Oh, that
in
is so
Kingston?
true today. It is something that we tell the first year students in no uncertain terms. You will not graduate if you do this. We're not playing around. I think it's very important to note that you may walk into the campanile. You may just simply not walk through it.
I mean, did that start in 1951? I mean, like immediately, or do you think
I don't
that
think so.
developed over time?
I have a theory. So many of these theories are backed up in zero fact. My theory is that this is understandably an extraordinarily important tradition. And what a wonderful way for KU to say, you have got to succeed in getting your diploma while you're here, because this is the coolest thing and it's something you get to look forward to. And so I think that it's not a myth, it's true that you will not graduate if you walk through it before this amazing event. I think that it was this evolved as a legend or as a tradition, simply because it's that important to experience this for the first time with your cap and gown as you're celebrating your commencement.
Curtis, we got a request. Could you move to the other side so the people at home can see the photo?
Happily. So there are, yes.
I don't remember her last name, maybe you can help me. Her first name is Marla, and she was in the registrar's office and worked on her doctorate. And her doctoral research was actually on what are the key things that help students graduate. What are there was a research component to it, and surveys and evaluations. And they found that the key thing that was important for students, maybe on the level of symbol, was to walk through the campanile. I mean, that was her research, and it was proven that for the students themselves, that was a key to them thinking about graduating and getting through.
So that is, for our online viewers, that is an illustration of this otherwise, anecdotal answer, is that it has become such a, there are groups that will walk up the hill as freshmen. Mount Oriad Scholars is one of them. And so this simple notion of walking down the hill, walking through the campanile before you walk down the hill, has become such an important element of just being a Jayhawk, that I think clearly with this research study, it helps our students stay on track. And that is, in my opinion, why we've got this fun story that you cannot walk through it. Or now some people argue that the story is you can't walk through it and graduate on time. I choose to amp it up a bit because it's that important. You cannot graduate if you walk through it. Now, some people say, oh my gosh, as a kid, I did that. I mean, you might be in trouble. So questions about other traditions, questions about some of our history? Yes.
Well, just, of course, the stadium isn't completely demolished yet, but, 3/4 has been. Was there anything of historic artifacts that maybe were saved, will be incorporated in some fashion into the new stadium?
I understand that there is an element of the development plan that incorporates some of the tradition. It's one of the reasons we don't have 100% of the stadium gone. It's the same footprint. It's important that you can still see it from the hill. It's A lot of the elements of what was, and I suppose is, since we still have 25% of it, it's the oldest college football stadium west of the Mississippi. I do know of one particular element. I don't know how well it answers your question, but I'm going to give it anyway. Some folks in the room know that there's this crazy guy that was at school in the early 90s, and we called him Captain Jayhawk. I rode his coattails a bit during my undergraduate years, and Captain Jayhawk led a group of us after we beat K-State in 91 onto the field, took a goalpost and sent it over to Potter Lake. Captain Jayhawk and I were the only two foolish enough to go into Potter Lake with the goalposts. It was as scary environmentally as it ever has been, and we were never able to get our clothes clean after that.
Were you vaccinated?
Should have been. Surprised we're still here. However, more often than not, anytime a goalpost goes into Potter Lake, it is then retrieved, whether it can be reused or not. You've seen that they've gotten good at putting pins in the base of the goalpost so that they just kind of come down rather than get torn down, which certainly has some safety elements to it. But we knew that day that a piece of the goalpost went to the Hawk, a piece of the goalpost went to someone's apartment, and a piece of it sunk to the bottom of Potter Lake. As a tangent to the football stadium activities, Potter Lake and Campanile are being taken care of, preserved. And they emptied Potter Lake, and wouldn't you know it, there at the bottom of Potter Lake was that piece of goalpost. Oh. So unsuccessfully, Captain Jayhawk and I tried to claim that it was our property. And I did get some pictures of it and said I would be right back to retrieve it. It was 20 feet long. There's no way we were going to do anything with it. But I heard that they're trying to use that, or maybe even a piece of it, to build some displays at the entrance to the new stadium, talking about traditions and student fandom, and if so, somehow we're going to get our story told, because if that is our goalpost, and I don't know, Captain Jayhawk and I sacrificed our clothing to be a part of that story. Good question. It is clearly important. It's a little bit like the Beware the Fog banner that was first hung in February of 1988 when Duke made their last appearance in Allen Fieldhouse and beat us in overtime. Not cool. But that banner was hung, and some of you know the story behind it. The students had to steal shower curtains from a dorm in order to sew them together to make the banner. And the original one hangs in the entrance of the field house, and is an important element of this notion of maintaining our traditions. Any other questions?
Curtis, what's the oldest tradition that you've found at KU?
I gotta say the Jayhawk, but that's a bit of a lazy answer. Jayhawk actually predates the university, right? Or at least the story thereof. I remember, so part of these presentations, part of this book project relate to a number of years that I was honored to run KU-Info, which on its own was a 50-year tradition. And you can imagine, we claimed to accept any question that you had. And then the sub-claim was, doesn't even have to be about KU. But then the internet started dealing with those questions pretty well. We would still get questions like how many Allen Fieldhouses would fit in the world's oceans? Or how much would it cost to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool with Jell-O? Now, it was important for us to maintain that those, that was about 5% of our questions, and 95% of our questions were, when's spring break, when's ad drop, when am I gonna know if tomorrow's a snow day? I mean, in any case. So we were constantly getting the question, how did this tradition start? Or how long ago did we start walking down the hill for commencement? One of the questions that we got like that we could never answer, and we even brought in folks like Max Falkenstein and others to say, when did we start doing this? Was waving the wheat. And honestly, I can't say that I've done an academic research study on it, but we have tried to get an answer to that question for the longest time. And basically, as far as we can tell, it just kind of became. It was something that, and of course you could argue that students are just waving their hands. I mean, it's a lot like the Wheaties. You didn't eat your Wheaties, bye-bye. Well, of course, it made sense to brand it as a wheat waving, but even as far back as 100 years ago, we've got some pictures of at least the crowd doing this as a still shot. So that's a good question, and maybe that's the answer, is wave the wheat. It seems to be old enough that we don't even have an origin story for it. Question?
Did KU-Info begin on Jayhawk Boulevard across from Bailey Hall?
KU-Info.
That building that's a bus stop.
Yeah, that's a great question. KU-Info actually started in Strong Hall. So it was not in that little booth was a gift of the class of 1950. I owe a lot to the class of 1950. They gave me one of my best stories. They gave us that booth that actually, that's the second coming of that booth. It used to be right on Jayhawk Boulevard and has since been moved during that project to improve Jayhawk Boulevard as a street. And it was a little bit before that project. It was around 2008 that KU-Info moved in to that space and started answering walk-up questions on Jayhawk Boulevard. But the genesis of it was in 1970 when, as many of you know, significant unrest on campus, lots of questions, not only from students and Lawrencians, but even the students' parents. Are they safe? So they decided they needed a rumor control hotline. And that's Emily Taylor's unused desk in the corner with the phone, 3506, that became KU-Info. I like that story a lot.
How about the Rock Chalk chant? When did that start?
Rock Chalk is arguably as old as Wave the Wheat or older. There was a chemistry professor who ran a chemistry club, and the club decided they needed a cheer. I really want to give you the year that this started. If someone knows it, please holler. I think it was very early 1900s, although Bailey Hall was built in 1900. So I'm going to say late 1800s to right at 1900. They chose Rah Rah Jayhawk KSU as their cheer. Early enough that KSU was synonymous with the school that we are actually talking about. Early enough that our friends to the west were, what was the name of agricultural school, and had a different name even prior to that. But there is early evidence, documented evidence that KSU was sometimes used as a nickname for the University of Kansas. But more importantly, they said rah rah, and then it morphed relatively quickly into, ironically, the nickname for the form of limestone that was native, not necessarily to this very location, but to northeast Kansas, was chalk rock. And switched it, rock chalk, put it into an already existing cheer, and then that's how we got rock chalk. And it was born from this chemistry club. There's also a part of that story where they, evidently were on a train returning from some gathering, and they heard, they decided this cheer needed to have a rhythmic element to it, and the rhythm that was provided by the train itself helped with the second part of the rock chalk. That's kind of fun. Some of these stories we wish were deeper and broader than they are. I don't know, rock chalk might be one of them. What is rock chalk? Well, it's limestone. Can you give me something more? I mean, is it haunted? But still, best college cheer. Let's see, examples of that are Theodore Roosevelt is actually quoted as having said, rock chalk is the best college cheer in the land. Okay, he said that. Have you heard the Abraham Lincoln quote that you shouldn't believe everything you see on the internet? Sorry. And then, let's see. These folks can help me with this one too. There was an Olympics held in Belgium, and the US athletes were gathered to meet with the king. The king says, what's it like to be an athlete in the United States? What's it like to be a student? Tell me about your colleges. Give me a college yell. And sure enough, for the king of Belgium, they did the rock chalk chant. Chose it as the example of a college cheer. These are stories that we have to have in our back pocket when anyone claims that KU isn't better than their school, so that we can simply prove they are wrong. And instead of just saying it's a great cheer, we can say a president thought it, a king thought it. It's not just us. And that's true for our mascot. It's true for our traditions. It's true for our cheer. We've already talked about how the first Jayhawk was created in 1912. So was our fight song, I'm a Jayhawk, in 1912. So was our first homecoming. And it starts making you feel bad for those who graduated in 1911. They missed out on some of this stuff. I feel like I need to check on how we're doing with, holy cow, it's 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to my spot. We have only scratched the surface, but I so enjoy these presentations being directed by the audience and questions that you have. And so as much as I should cut it off right now, I do want to make sure there aren't any burning questions that haven't been asked yet. Ooh, yes.
I have a personal question.
Yeah. Oh.
I was the baby J from 1994 to 1997.
Awesome.
With an amazing mascot coach that some people in the room know. I tell my students now that I teach at KU now, I'm on faculty, that when I was the J, we didn't wear clothes. The Jayhawk did not have clothes. Now they got an Adidas outfit.
On the outside.
On the outside.
I know what you're talking about. While you were
The Jayhawk did not have clothes
Gotcha.
when I was the J. And now they have graduation outfits and outfits for everything.
Okay.
And so that happened when I was away from KU. Do you have any idea? When they started dressing up the mascot.
Right, I agree with you that it's a recent development. I believe that it started with the weeks leading up to commencement. For instance, senior night in Allen Fieldhouse, the band would wear tuxedos, and then suddenly the Jayhawks wearing a tuxedo. I think it is a very recent development that they're wearing the uniform that is similar to what's being worn on the football field or the basketball field. And I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if Adidas helped with that a little bit. You know that our uniforms change only as quickly as our corporate partner thinks that they can put them on the shelves so that we will all buy them. Please buy the ones that are themed to the Beware the Fog banner. Because while I was in endowment, I helped create an agreement with Adidas that every year the team wears that. They'll donate to the Fog Allen Scholarship. So I personally want that one to keep going. So help me out with that one. But yeah, I think it's a great comment about the evolution of not just the way that we represent the university, but just simply the changes that go on year after year and make things look a lot different than maybe they did in the 90s or the 80s. And some of us, traditionalists are quick to say it shouldn't change. I am pleased that our mascots get to wear clothes. I think they probably like that.
On the outside.
Right, and on the inside.
I was just I don't know the year, but it is actually a requirement that they wear clothes now. Like you will not see a naked Jayhawk.
Oh, really?
That was, yes, at least,
That
I was
a
an
good
alumni
point.
until 2022.
Okay.
And that, at some point in there, because we had
It's a modesty
because we
thing.
had a mascot costume as well, for
Right.
alumni.
Gotta cover their-
And
right,
there were very
right.
strict rules about the Jayhawk should never be naked. So,
So it sounds like just an element of the agreement that the mascot, a part of the mascot is their uniform.
Curtis, I do have a great personal story that links together the Baby J and Campany. Can I share it?
Please.
Okay, so I graduated undergrad, 1972, had a horrible threat of a thunderstorm, and so they canceled the walk. And we actually had a graduation ceremony in the field house, which was awful. It was 90 degrees and so on. But so all those years, I never had experience walking down the hill. I got my doctorate in 96. And at that time, I had a relative who was the Baby J, one of the Baby J's, and they were doing construction at the Campanile, honest to God, and they were not going to let people walk through, and they didn't let people walk through. I mean, there was a huge brouhaha about it, and it never happened again. I don't know if that's when they were repairing the bells, but they were definitely doing this construction, and I was just so sad because I thought, here's my chance. And my relative and I hatched this scheme, completely illegal, that we were going to go through there, and we didn't care.
That day.
And there, yes, and their KU police were right. The police were there because people were so. Here comes Baby J. Baby J is on my arm, and it was like the Red Sea party. And I got to walk down with Baby J.
Our traditions
They
are
really
second
worked.
to none. We take them seriously. Every year at KU-Info, we got calls about, why are you letting people call it Fraser? It's Fraser. Why are you letting people call it Hayworth? It's Haworth. And our answer was, I love that you're so passionate about that. I don't know if I can fix it, but the class of 1970 also didn't get to walk down the hill. And 50 years later, the Alumni Association said, we're going to fix that. And we're for about a year, I think, the plans were put in place to welcome all of the 1970 graduates back to campus. So in May of 2020, they could walk down the hill, finally. Did they? No. Twice bitten.
But the next year they did.
Yeah.
Because my husband was in that class, and it was so important to him to do that. I didn't, I said, well, you have to do it when you graduate from law school. And he said, doesn't matter. They cheated me out of that one. I get that.
You gotta do it. I think, I'd love for this to go on 2 more hours. We've only scratched the surface, but what a great way to kind of sum things up by saying the magic of being a part of the Jayhawk Nation is that our history and our traditions are so strong and deep, and everyone knows a piece of them and wants to share it, that it's just, that's why you can be in another country and wear a KU thing and hear someone say rock chalk, because we are just a stronger Jayhawk Nation than so many other schools. I get it. I have this foolish bias, and I'm rather proud to present it. It is written throughout every page of this book that KU is better than everybody else. But I also really enjoy trying to prove it. So the fact that each of you has these great stories to tell about your experience here and you're part of the tradition. If you go down to the DeBruce Center and you read Danny Manning's quote quote. It's, you come here because of the tradition, and then you leave a part of it. So, it gives me goosebumps. Thank you, everybody online.